Yo, what's going on, guys? Today we're back with a very interesting debate, joined by my guy Gavin from NBA Real Talk. How's it going, my man?
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Big fan of what you do.
Appreciate it, as am I for your stuff. Yeah. So today we're gonna be talking about kind of a little debate, a little discussion of the top five players, known playing in the '90s that we think would benefit the most in today's game. Not necessarily the best players in today's game, although some of them could be, but who would maybe see the most dramatic improvement playing in today's era. So we picked five guys. We also have an honorable mention, but I mean, yeah, we could just hop right into this. So I guess I'll give you the floor first for your honorable mention. Who did you pick and for what reason?
For honorable mentions, I got Steve Kerr, and just the obvious reason of him being a three-point specialist back in the day. Back then, the three-point shot was just not that coveted, even by the guys who were great at shooting it. You only shot them if you were wide open. So the fact that he would just be encouraged to jack him up today, he'd probably be averaging between 6 and 10 a game easily playing in today's NBA. Even coming off the bench and stuff, he would easily be seen as a guy that they want to just run off screens and shoot threes. So I got Steve Kerr and I got Dana Barros because he was just a quick, lightning, fiery little guy. He was kind of like an Iverson before an Iverson. So I think for obvious reasons, just running the floor, the fast pace of today's game, just guys like that really would have had a lot to offer in the fast-paced game of today.
I like those picks. I like them. I think for my honorable mention, I'll reveal two of them. You gave us two, so I'll give two. I think the obvious one, and I wanted to put him honorable mention, not in the top five because I didn't want to make it too boring, I guess. But I had Michael Jordan. I think the way that he would benefit the most is just the pace of play today. I think would benefit him a lot, and also like you look at today is more so a numbers game than it's ever been. Back then it's all about winning, and that's kind of why you see guys like Bill Russell praised high, Jordan himself praised high, Kobe, Shaq, all those guys. But now today, like they also care a lot about your numbers. And the one thing about Jordan is I feel like he definitely put up the best scoring numbers we could see from a player's average over his career. But I think it would be even higher, in today's era. And you'd also see a more expansive, more playmaking ability, more rebounding opportunity because the game is so spaced out. So I think because of that, like he would see a dramatic improvement. I don't know if it'd improve more than these guys. More than likely it'd be better than all of them still. But yeah, so I have him there. And I also want to throw in Dale Ellis, actually. I think Dale Ellis, he's kind of a taller two guard essentially. But, wasn't a bad defender necessarily. And I think he was one of the first guys to shoot threes at a high volume, right? That we saw. I think he was the first player to get 1,000 made threes in the NBA or something like that. Or like it was 1,200 or something. So I have to put him there. I mean, it's a more spaced out game. Make or miss league is what they call it. So got to put a guy in there that was one of the like pioneers, I guess, of the 3-point shot at a high level. But yeah. I guess those are.
Barely even remember, but I think I had his starting.
Yeah. So I guess I'll throw it to you again, though. Who do you got at number 5?
Number 5, I'm going Sam Perkins because Sam Perkins was a 3-point sniper back in the day, and I just think his game, A, would just translate naturally to today's game, and B, he'd just be getting more threes. I think it's a natural fit. He was the closest thing to a true 3-point sniper specialist, back in those days when it wasn't quite a circus shot, but it still wasn't a shot that was a big part of most teams' games. But Sam Perkins was on the other end of it. It was a guaranteed hit. I remember this game we went. I think it was 7 for 7 or 8 for 8. This legendary game from 3. So Sam Perkins is just burned into my mind as someone who'd be great in today's NBA.
I like that. I think my number 5, I'm going to go with Penny Hardaway. And I think there's a few ways that I think he'd benefit. I think the main one is you look at, he obviously was a taller guard. And you look at point guards today, there's a lot of guys that are kind of like these 6'4", 6'5" builds that players or coaches really or GMs that, they'll be all over it like for them essentially. Like, I know obviously Ben Simmons isn't doing much right now. But, he was a highly sought-after draft pick. Markelle Fultz, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So there's there's just a ton of dudes that like fit this mold that I feel like he would fit that. And then at the same time, one of the biggest things against him as to why he couldn't sustain the high level of play was the injuries. Well, now in like the load management era is basically what we're in. I feel like he would have less problems maybe with that for a long-term degree. And I think we'd probably see him at a higher level or a high level for longer. And I think that would more than likely up his chances because he's not in the Hall of Fame right now. But I think it would up his chances of maybe being a Hall of Famer if he was in today's era. So I got him number 5.
I mean, yeah, I mean, and also just anybody who had injury problems in the past, you never know how much they benefit from today's technology and, you know, medical methods because, you know, it wasn't too long ago that they were still just kind of like, you know, tape you up and get back out there. So,
yeah.
Interesting choice, Penny Hardaway. I mean, I think he'd definitely benefit from the pace of play. There's no doubt about that. So,
yeah. But for our number 4s, who do you got at number 4?
I threw in Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf because he was very Phil Jackson made this supposedly unflattering comparison a few years ago when he compared Steph Curry to Abdul-Rauf. People thought that was very insulting, but Abdul-Rauf was a real problem back in the day. And lots of players got a lot of stories about him tearing it up. And the reason I say that because he was one of those dribble, like just pop it off the top, like, you know, pop that 3-pointer in your grill kind of thing. And I just think like his game perfectly translates to basically he would be playing. I'm not saying he'd be as good as Steph Curry. Nobody get it twisted out there. I'm just saying he'd be playing a very Steph Curry-like game at a very high level.
I like that. And I think another player who, you know, I guess like the floor spacing ability. I mean, you even mentioned him, but I have him as well at my number 4. You had him number 5, but I have a number 4, and that's Sam Perkins. I just think like the way he stretches the floor, he's kind of a big body, so he could be like the small ball 5 today. You know, and I think also like the one thing about him is kind of like a big shot Bob or like an Andre Iguodala. Like he would hit the timely shots. And that's a guy you always want on your team, especially like, you know, if you have 4 shot creators on the floor or something like that, or even 3 or something like to that degree, and maybe another shooter, like you can't even leave Sam Perkins wide open because that guy is going to make you pay. And in today's era, like he would be able to, I guess, showcase that at an even higher level. So I got to put Sam Perkins number 4. He always was on some pretty solid teams. Unfortunately, never won a title, but he was on some really good teams. And I think he'd be a big part in that as well. Maybe today he would have a championship. So I got to put him number 4. But yeah.
I love that. No, I do.
For our top 3 now, number 3, who do you got at your 3rd spot?
I'm going to go with Grant Hill because, you know, he was a great player, obviously pre-injury for the Pistons. And he just had that real freak-like nature to his game like Giannis. I mean, I still got memories burned into my mind of him doing like a drop, step, spin, slam dunk from the 3-point line and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I just think the athleticism and the sort of all-aroundness of his game, he was very sort of LeBron before LeBron. And we just see how guys like Giannis benefit from today with the pace of play and being kind of unstoppable. And, you know, Grant Hill is probably a slightly better shooter than Giannis too. So I just think if you look at guys like Giannis and LeBron, who's played in a slightly different game at the beginning of his career compared to the way the game is now at the end of his career, and how much Giannis and LeBron have thrived in the modern game, I think it's just, you know, it's maybe a bit of a say. It's almost like, you know, you said you didn't want to be boring and put Jordan in there because, like, yeah, just pick the greatest player of all time to, you know, do better in today's NBA. But I was like, you know, Grant Hill would be an interesting choice because he was touted as the next Jordan. He was great, but he never really peaked before he started getting hurt. So, I mean, to see Grant Hill hit his stride in the modern game with the fast pace and the wide open lane, I mean, he would have just been unstoppable.
I think people forget he was top 3 in MVP. I believe it was the last year with Jordan, or maybe it was 1996. It was one of the last, like one of the second three-peat years with when the Bulls were winning. And Grant Hill was top 3 in MVP then. So, yeah. I mean, and obviously like the injuries came into play, unfortunately. But yeah, it would have been nice to see him healthy. And I think also like, just like Penny Hardaway, like he would benefit as well from, I guess, the load management era. But yeah, for my number 3, I got someone who is also probably an interesting choice, and I'm going with Drazen Petrovic. And I pick him because I feel like personally he's the most underrated shooter in NBA history. Like, I think personally for me, like, I wouldn't put him like quite top 3, top 4 shooter, but I think you could argue he's top 5. I would probably say he's a top 10 shooter ever, and I don't even think a lot of people even say that. But the one thing about him too is that he brought like the intensity too. He might not have seemed like it because, you know, sometimes like we think of, I guess, the stereotype in the league is sometimes like the European players, they're soft or like kind of weak or something like that. Like, this guy was tough. Like, and like he might like talk a lot of game, but he could also back it up against the majority of the league. So I'm putting him at number 3. I think he's also, you know, unfortunately he wasn't in the league for that long because he tragically passed away. But I think when he was in the league, he was one of the more clutch players as well. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, like kind of a team built around him in today's league when this is kind of like his calling card essentially. So I got him at my 3rd spot.
Yeah, no, I like that choice. I think it's really solid. I think he's a name that obviously is in the back of my mind, but probably just I didn't even really think of it because he just, like you said, he had a pretty short career for unfortunate reasons. But I totally agree with the choice. He would benefit in today's game, especially. You know what? This is kind of a side point, but you know, and this isn't to say the thing about how like today's players are wusses or something like that, but I'm saying that what you spoke to with his mentality, having that next level mentality, like guys like Jimmy Butler have it. You know what I mean? It's in today's game, especially, the mentality really does separate you from the rest. When has that not been the case in sports? Don't get me wrong, but you could just tell athletes got a little too much other stuff on their mind. And having that just dog mentality and caring about nothing but the game is going to get you a lot in today's NBA.
Yeah, more now than ever too, which is unfortunate. But it would be distinct, and it would definitely separate him from a lot of guys. But
good point. Awesome stuff.
So our top 2, our number 2 selection. Who do you have number 2?
Somewhat random, but I'm going with Shaq. Because I think Shaq, and we're talking like peak Shaq from like 99 to like 03, you know, like sort of like that peak Lakers run. He was probably a bit better of an athlete, you know, in the early and mid 90s. But Shaq could still run the floor. You know, he was still capable of like, you know, being a fast break guy, even at 320 pounds or whatever he was. And I just think today's game is so open. You know, back then, it was all about getting the ball in the post, but the post was really collapsed in. You know, you're going up against 5 different guys in there a lot of the time. And I think because Shaq was he wasn't underrated as a passer or anything, but he just, you know, you didn't get a chance to appreciate his passing that often. He was a great passer. And I just think the attention he would draw on defense, the way that the 3-point shot, even though that's usually a long rebound, I just think the ability for him to I think he'd just be able to dominate because there's no real centers. There's not really that many centers in the NBA that are the type that are made to stop him, which is funny to say because there wasn't really any back then either. But I just think his game in a funny way is so mismatched to today's game that he would just dominate like even more. You know what I mean? Because he would be just so he'd be like Zion Williamson, basically. You know what I mean? Like when Zion was just dominating down low. Shaq, to be honest, he'd be like 2 Zion Williamsons, you know what I mean, in today's game. So I think just the fact that he'd be such an inside presence like that, and just would basically be keeping people to the outside and make them not even want to come inside because the presence he has. I just think his game somehow would be taken to even another level.
Yeah, I think the other thing too with him is that, like, not to say that centers today aren't like that or anything like that, but you look at, Jokic and Embiid are definitely top tier centers. But back then, like, you had Hakeem, you had David Robinson, you had Patrick Ewing, you had Alonzo Mourning. Like, there were so many centers that you had to worry about almost like every other night. So it would definitely make Shaq even have more time, I guess, like, to like catch his breath. Like, oh, I'm going against, you've seen this, I'm sure, the stuff he said about Rudy Gobert, for instance, someone who some people consider a top 5 or near top 5 center in the league. Like, wow, how do you think he's going to do against a majority of the league, right? So
it's hard. What even is a center anymore in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
I Or to the point is like I feel like Shaq would just wear these guys down so much. You know what I mean? He's gonna take him aside, he's gonna bang him around, he's gonna be juking left, right, doing little hook shots over them pressure. Like a guy like Embiid, who's a beast on defense, can you envision him being able to do much of anything about Shaq?
Yeah, I don't. He probably not. Yeah. So I like that pick though for number 2. I think my number 2. It's interesting because 2 through 4, these guys I think combined for like 2 All-NBA teams in their whole career. This guy did make 1, but I'm going with Anthony Mason, and the reason I'm going with him is I feel like, he was seen as a quality player for so long. I don't think anyone in the right mind though would probably consider him at all for like Hall of Fame, but
No.
what I will say, but what I will say is I feel like he perfectly, and maybe even you could argue better, would complete a lot of the Draymond Green abilities today, because he can kind of score at a high level, not necessarily the greatest shooter, which Draymond was not, but I mean, still, I would argue maybe even more efficient at attacking the basket, maybe a more proficient scorer in that degree. But also, like, he could be like the point forward. He was an elite rebounder, and he was hard-nosed and like tough-headed, essentially, right? Like, he had a lot of altercations with some guys, but I think also like he kind of knew maybe when to pull away. Like, we haven't seen as many suspensions or anything like that from him as we do even with Draymond now, and the league is even probably more lax on suspending people now. So it's like, imagine what they do with Draymond like then, like, right? So I don't know. I think Anthony Mason would be a nice choice, and if he got on the right team, if he was on the right team, because a lot of people would love a guy like Draymond on their team. It's just like the antics that come with it is sometimes what you wouldn't like, but I feel like he wouldn't have those antics as much. And I think there are some ways that maybe he could add an element to him. And if he even had just a respectable jump shot, not like great, but decent in this era, I mean, that he would probably, if he's in the right system, like I said, he could have been a Hall of Famer then today. I'm not like, I don't think that's an exaggeration to say either.
When you break it down like that, sort of like the Draymond type comparison, because that started to paint the vision for me, like Anthony Mason with those outlet passes, right?
Yeah.
He could thrive in today's fast-paced game because he could be that guy down low who really gets things going. So, a good pick.
Yeah. So now we're at our top spot, number 1. Who do you have at the top of your list?
I've got Reggie Miller. I think this is just the most obvious one. I basically said about Steve Kerr in my honorable mention. Reggie Miller was a good, he's not like a top 10 player of all time or something like that. He's not like a great, but he's a great player. Like, he's a top 100 player. You know what I mean? He was a great shooter, and he was a clutch guy, and he was just an ace shooter back at a time where shooting, was still part of the game, but not the way it is today. So I just think, I don't know what his averages are for his career, but it's probably high teens or something. And I just think there's no reason to think that Reggie, even well into his career, couldn't average 20 to 25 points a game, because he can easily get up 10 threes a game. You know what I mean? He was getting that up back in the day. You know what I mean? In today's game, this guy could be going off for lots of 50 pieces, I bet, on random nights, I'm saying, you know what I mean? Because all the shots would be there. He's capable of making them, and the game is played in a style that totally suits the way he played the game. So Reggie Miller, and that's almost the boring pick, because I think a lot of people
maybe. I mean, I also had Reggie Miller number 1. So, but I do think like the reason I kind of even like told you, like, I think my number 1 and 2, like prior to when we recorded, my number 1 and 2, it kind of goes hand in hand, because I think, Steph Curry is a player that you don't see a lot of, in like any generation. He's like a once in a generation type of player. But I think Anthony Mason could do a lot of the Draymond things, and I think Reggie Miller could do a lot of the Klay Thompson things. But I would even argue maybe even better. I mean, I think that his career is probably more impressive than Klay Thompson, which is insane because Klay is a 4-time champion, and he'll remind you that he's a 4-time champion every time that he gets. But I think that Reggie Miller is one of the clutchest players ever. I think the way that he moves off the ball is almost more comparable, more impressive maybe than Klay, but almost more comparable to Steph in a way. just because like he was the one getting all the attention on those Pacers team from behind the 3-point line. So what I will say is I think, yeah, he might be the obvious pick at number 1 just because like he was the greatest shooter from this time, unless you count Ray Allen, but he kind of like played only a couple of years, I guess, in the 90s. But like I don't know. I just think that Reggie, and especially too, like what I said with Drazen Petrovic, what I said with Anthony Mason, and like even what you echoed, like the mentality thing is huge. And I think that he also has that, similar to a Jimmy Butler or whoever, maybe like a Damian Lillard or something like that. Like he kind of just has the it factor, I guess, when it comes to that. And I think that would separate him over a lot of guys. I mean, he still is a Hall of Famer, probably. I mean, I think personally a top 50 player ever just because of his impact that he has. But who's to say? I mean, even too, like his numbers, I think for his career averages like 18, 3 and 3. And I say today more than ever, it's like a numbers game. Like in today's era, maybe that's like 23, 5 and 5 on a really good team that like maybe is built around him and they put the right pieces around him. So I don't know. That's why I got Reggie Miller number 1.
He's almost the perfect guy to represent this kind of thing because he's a great player, but he hasn't won the titles or anything. The reason he's great is because he was right there with the greats. You know, like that makes him great. Like I can't remember what one of those big basketball YouTubers, but he always made this thing about how Reggie Miller was overrated. And I thought to be overrated, you have to be like extremely highly rated. Like everyone who's positive Reggie Miller, we're not saying he's Jordan or something. We're saying this is a guy who could hit the shots, who wanted the big shots, who hit some game-winning shots, who had that same champions mentality. You know what I mean? He had all these attributes going for him, and so those are the perfect things that just translate over to today's game that would make him kind of a bit more unique amongst his peers to be able to benefit from the modern game, and just the fact he jacked up a lot of threes.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really agree more with that. But yeah, I mean, so those, I guess, are our lists. I guess before we go, did you what did you think, I guess, like of my list? Were there anything with my list that you were surprised with, or that you agreed with, or what do you think? And then I'll say.
First at Anthony Mason, that was the one that I was sort of like, how's he gonna pitch that? You know what I mean? When you said Petrovic, I was like, oh, like maybe you don't hear it often. But as soon as I started thinking back about Petrovic, and also that's the guy who had an impact, right? So it just sets off a lot of things where I'm like, Anthony Mason, like he was just like a big, mean guy, wasn't he? You know what I mean? I was kind of, where's that going to come from? But you started to paint the picture with the Draymond comparison. I thought, Anthony Mason was one hell of an outlet passer. You know what I mean? I mean, rebounds are abundant in today's NBA. That's the thing with the pace of the game, as well as the shots they love to take, 3-point shot. Rebounds are abundant. So guys like that, Petrovic and Mason were interesting choices. We agreed on Perkins. We agreed on Reggie, so no surprises there. And, Penny was a good, fast-paced player. No reason to think he couldn't bet it. And, actually, the Penny one was interesting, too, because you also spoke to it in comparison to the type of guards in today's NBA, right? It's another era of the short guard. And Penny was like 6'8", something like that. At least
like 6'7", 6'8".
Yeah, so he'd just be he'd be running on these guys and be able to dunk over them. So
yeah. I mean, again, we agreed on Reggie and Perkins. I did like your pick with Mahmoud in there. I think that's definitely one that doesn't get enough appreciation. And then also with Shaq, I mean, a lot of people don't realize just how much even defenses are a little bit different than Shaq's prime, that he would draw 3 or 4 every single time. I think it would bring out the more of him. He still would dominate, we know that, but it would also bring out more of Shaq the passer than we've seen. And I think that's kind of Embiid's a good example of that, because you've seen every year he's passing the ball more, it's leading to more shots for his teammates, and I think you'd see a similar thing like that for Shaq. But I mean,
yeah, awesome. All right, we got that list up. All right, can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, but again, appreciate you joining me on this debate. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for watching. Comment down below, who do you think, who is the player from the 90s that sticks out to you, if we mention him or not, that would, I guess, benefit the most in today's game. But yeah, I think that's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching, and we're out. Peace.